Hey, Guosilens here. DoT is back on the menu after literally 1.5 years. So DoT means rejoice, as Hysilens is a brand new carry for this archetype, bringing some really powerful damage in some interesting ways. But I will be talking about her more and if DoT is truly back later on. I'll first be going through her pretty neat kit, and then my calculations on her eidolons, her best builds, stats, and more. Like and sub if this video helps you out, share to any DoT friends, and now let's begin. Hysilens is a physical nihility unit, our second after Luca, and our second physical DoT DPS. Her stats are okay, nothing special but nothing terrible, and the low energy is nice. As for her trace leveling priority, I would first invest into her ultimate, followed by her talent and skill, ignoring her basic attack as usual for most units. So, onto her kit. First off, her talent. When an ally target attacks, there is a 100% base chance for Hysilens to inflict wind shear, or bleed, or burn, or shock on the hit enemy target, and she will prioritize ones that aren't applied. Yes, she is Omni-DoT. And each DoT will pretty much always be doing 25% of her attack each, so that will occur at the start of enemy turns or be multiplied and activated during detonations. Her bleed technically scales on max HP, but is limited to the same multiplier as the rest, and wind shear can stack up to 5, but it takes quite a while to do so. But anyways, with enough attacks you ramp up all 4 of these elemental DoTs from Hysilens, and yes, they can coexist with, for example, a shock from Kafka, because they are from Hysilens, not Kafka, and are thus 2 separate effects. Anyway, 100 to 200% attack is very underwhelming. I mean, even Kafka has had 290% since her release, and Black Swan can stack up to obscene DoT multipliers. Well, that's because those aren't her actual DoT numbers, but more of a means to get to her real damage, so let's check it out. Her ult will deploy a zone for 3 turns, decreasing at the start of each of her turns. In this zone, enemy targets will get a small but nice to have attack reduction, but more importantly, a 25% def reduction. In a vacuum, this is a 15.4% DPS amp, but gets better since DoT has a bunch of different ways to access more def reduction. Now, this will count as def reduction, so this will work for tutorial. No more having to apply Black Swan's skill or use solitary healing in pure fiction, Kafka can abuse the tutorial icon all day every day. This ult will also do some okay damage, but now onto where Hysilens gets most of her power. When an enemy in the zone takes damage from DoT, Hysilens will deal 80% of her attack as physical DoT to them. Said DoT cannot trigger itself, and it has a cap of 8 times per turn or ally target attack, so detonations. But this isn't 8 times per whole enemy field, it's per enemy. So versus 5 enemies, you can proc this technically 40 times. But what this means is if the enemy has 8 damage over time debuffs on them, Hysilens will do an extra 640% attack DoT on top of that. You can see this effect by the very satisfying spam of numbers that happens. So, if an enemy takes a turn, every DoT on them is another 80% attack on top from Hysilens, every detonation likewise. Though, since it is an effect from DoTs causing damage, it means detonations cause them, but don't multiply them. This is unfortunate if you have a big detonation multiplier above 1 times, but in the case of frequent, slightly smaller detonations like Kafka's, that actually means you gain a ton of value. Because her elemental DoTs will get multiplied by 0.75 and 0.5 from Kafka's skill, but her ultimate zone DoTs instead happen after and outside of said multipliers, therefore acting as if they were detonated by a 1 times multi rather than 0.75 or 0.5. This means in the future, if we get a sustain or a support that has tiny but frequent DoT detonation multipliers, we could see some really big Hysilens synergy. And so remember her 4 different weak elemental DoTs from before? Well, those are now essentially another 80% attack each. And no, the stacks on wind shear do not count as multiple DoT instances. So lots of DoTs means lots of Hysilens damage, and she already provides 4 herself in her kit. Kafka can provide 1, 2 with patience is all you need, and Black Swan can also provide 1. Break DoTs also count, 4-star DoT units do too, and so does the Trend Light Cone, etc. But do not misconstrue this as needing 8 DoTs at all times, as replacing a Robin with a Guosilens is not the play. Anyway, for the rest of her abilities, we have her skill, which is a simple AoE damaging attack, but it has a bit of damage amp on top with a nice 20% universal vulnerability. Nice for DoT teams, not that exceptional outside of it. And her technique will be a dimension one, creating a moving bubble that lures in enemies. The battle importance of it though is that Hysilens will inflict 2 of her elemental dot effects at the start of the battle, so you can start wrapping up immediately. But now onto her passives and stat bonuses. First, her A2 will fix 2 big problems. First off, her ultimate zone will be automatically created at the start of combat, so no need to ult before everyone acts, meaning Kafka's tutorial potential is up from the get-go. The second problem is SP management in DoT teams, but Hysilens will regenerate 1 SP whenever she creates a zone. This is an immediate 1 SP at the start of the battle, like the Passerby set, which really helps her first rotation. And it is also just a free SP every ult. It's very helpful. Her A4 will then give her some agency. She will need Kafka as of her release, but at least now she can self-detonate her dots whilst also detonating ally ones. Every ult will be a universal 150% dot detonation multiplier onto all enemies, which is the strongest detonation we have so far. It's just nowhere near as frequent as post-buff Kafka. Finally, to turn EHR into something nice, we stole Black Swan's passive and made it stronger, giving Hysilens a 90% universal damage buff when hitting 120% effect hit rate. How nice. And then in Trace passives we get a whopping 14 speed, 18% attack, and 10% effect hit rate. 3 banger traces. So let's check out her Eidolons now before her build. Hysilens starts with an insane E1 just like Aglaia. First off, a straight up undiluted 1.16 times multiplier to all dot damage on the team. That's her dots, her ult zone dots, and any allied dots. It also includes the damage from detonations naturally. But then the second part is insane. When she inflicts one of her 4 elemental dots, she will then inflict a copy of it that essentially can coexist. So Hysilens at E1S0 can inflict 8 dots of her own. And what this does is permanently maximize her ult zone's effect, letting her do her 640% attack dot damage every single universal detonation on any enemy, as well as any enemy turn. It is massive if you want to run Hysilens Kafka with a support instead of Swan, but 4 extra dots will ramp up Black Swan's Arcana a ton as well, and the dot amp is also powerful for her. E2, however, is pretty underwhelming in a bunch of teams, like Aglaia, OPE1, OKE2. Now, when her zone is active, the damage boost effect from her A6 will apply to everyone, and this works without them building EHR. So she hits 120% EHR, the whole team now gets 90% damage. If you're running Kafka Hysilens and a support with Huohuo, this is pretty irrelevant. If you're running triple dot with Sustainless or a damaging sustain, then this gets pretty nice. Then E4 is opposite from most E4s as it is actually pretty cool, with a universal all-type res reduction during her ultimate zone. In a vacuum, a 1.2 times damage amp to everything that exists. But since dot teams are all about different elements, your other damaging allies will likely get a more noticeable buff. And finally, her E6 makes her special dot effects get even stronger. First, we get a 20% multiplier upgrade, going from 88% of her attack, including E3, to 108%. But then we get an upgrade on the limit. Instead of 8, it is now 12. Hysilens fulfills 8 by herself, but this means triple dot's power increases again. Here are my Eidolon calculations for a Kafka Hysilens Raw May team. What this means is that the E1 is a bit stronger than what it would be in triple dot, but if maximizing Arcana stacking with those 4 extra dots, you might even see a similar performance. But also her E2 is weaker here as she is only amping Kafka's damage rather than a whole team of damage dealers. If you need triple dot calculations, there are some out there by other theory crafters. So how do we build Hysilens? Well, DoT only has 1 relic set for carries, so for relics, pick none other than Prisoner in Deep Confinement. As for her planars, she can use the brand new Revelry set as her best if her EHR goal is satisfied. If you cannot satisfy it, for example you're not using a cone with the EHR for some reason, then she really needs the Pan-Cosmic Planar Ornament set for the 10% EHR whilst not neglecting offensive power. Glamoth at 135 is also okay, and Space Sealing likewise. For main stats, go for an EHR or attack percent chest, speed or attack percent boots, damage or attack percent orb, and then attack percent or energy rope. Let's explain more. Your chest will be dependent on substats you have. Your goal is 120% EHR, and so pick whatever gets you to that. For boots, I prefer a slower build as in 134 on her, but there are viable fast Hysilens builds too, and that would require speed boots. Her damage though is barely dependent on her actual turns, and the only thing high speed is doing is maybe min-maxing Kafka follow-ups and inching out an extra ultimate in enough cycles. Anyway, she has 102 base speed though and 14 speed in traces, so I would go for attack boots with speed subs on your gear. The orb is whatever has the best subs, but damage orb is better as she will have a buttload of attack already. And rope, I would usually say attack percent because you're going to get a bunch of kills and you'll get hit a ton, especially if you run 134 only on her. But energy is fine to use if you are struggling with SP management and need to use some more basics on her. For a stat goal, you can aim for 3.5k attack pre-combat, 3.6k if not using Kafka and using Revelry, but like, come on. And with Kafka's attack buff, you will be soaring above 4k in combat. Then your speed should generally be 134, but 160 is possible too. You can technically also min-max her speed to abuse her S1's 10% speed that we will see in a bit, and thus drop her speed with her S1 to 129 since she still needs some speed to hit the 0 cycle breakpoint, but that's like 2 saved subsets only. And finally, her EHR needs to be 120%. As for light cones, let's now check out her signature. This beautiful cone will first give a 40% EHR buff to help maximize Hysilens damage stacking passive. Then when an enemy is afflicted by a debuff by the wearer, they will get enthrallment for 3 turns, so basically permanent here. While affected, every debuff from the wearer will increase the target's dot taken, so vulnerability effect, by 5% up to 6 times. Essentially, we can get a 30% dot vulnerability from her. And then finally, if said enthralled target is attacked by an ally, that ally gets a 10% speed buff for 3 turns. So again, permanent but not up instantly unless you use an attacking technique like Kafka, but only Kafka will get the speed buff until the rest of the team attacks. This is a lot of words to say basically, this is a mini Harmony unit in a cone with 30% dot vulnerability and 10% team-wide speed. It is very comfy as it can help hit some nice speed thresholds like 167 equal Kafka. E1 is much stronger for overall team damage, but S1 is also pretty potent and cheaper. For other 5-star light cones, you can use Jiao Cho or Black Swan signatures. Jiao Cho would amp the whole team whilst also providing a bunch of EHR for her needs, and this is pretty nice in the triple dot team. Black Swans provides a ton of damage boost, especially with the def reduction stacking that the dot team can get up to. But if you use triple dot, do you have 2 Black Swan signatures? Patience is all you need can be used if you like for an extra dot since Kafka prefers tutorial now, and for 4 stars you have Eyes of the Prey and Good Night Sleep well. Its showtime is also okay. So what are my thoughts on Hysilens? Well, she is an incredible damage dealer. I was very surprised by some of the numbers I was getting from her. But every game mode is shilling dot currently in some way, and the new enemies I faced were made to die to dot. The DPS performance in 3.x has all been pretty balanced statistically, and so Hysilens is yet another banger DPS you can pull for a different archetype. And honestly, now that we know 3-team content is coming, having an archetype like DoT that can use units that don't get stolen, that's a good thing. In the non-shield parts, they still performed greatly, and the core of Black Swan Kafka Hysilens can clear all content right now. Pure Fiction and MOC are their best, and they will struggle into Apocalyptic Shadow without shilling because they still don't do toughness damage. Flame Reaver has a broken dot buff that lets you infinitely ult on Hysilens and get 4000 points, and the Fei Xiao Future AS, which is an awesome fight, has an OP mechanic that does more toughness damage for you based on enemy dot count. Outside of these shield bosses, they are 3 different element types, so good luck finding the exact boss that works for all 3. My problem with it all though is that Hysilens isn't bringing anything new, at least not yet until we get units that synergize with her weird extra dot effect. Black Swan in 2.0 was doing disgusting damage and brought dot to the top, and Hysilens is just another dot carry that will make dot very strong again and very healthy for a while. Like, they are one of the highest damaging teams again. But not getting anything else dot related after Swan killed it off. Now, triple dot is properly a thing and very strong, but we still haven't got fixes to dot's problems that will show up as HP goes up again. They are still backloaded, especially Black Swan, and all the modes right now require you to finish fights as early as possible for maximum rewards. So we would ideally want a sustain or support that can cause some mini but frequent dot detonations, or have their own small dots to boost up Hysilens' ult zone effect, or a support that advances enemy AV. But then comes the question, who would we replace in triple dot? And it's probably Swan if it's not a sustain. So anyway, if you care about the now, Hysilens is a fantastic top tier DPS and you will be happy with her performance. And to be honest, every DPS slowly falls off, so it's not DoT exclusive anyway. But as a final note, you do need Kafka for Hysilens. And so, speaking of Kafka, let's talk about teams. Hysilens will always need Kafka in her team. It is non-negotiable as of 3.5. So your core duo before anything else happens will be Hysilens Kafka. Kafka is the only real DoT support we have right now, with detonations on her skill, talent, and ult with such high frequency. The buffs made her into such an insane support for DoT. I have a guide on Kafka if you want her 3.4 build paths, and with Hysilens release, I recommend the tutorial 167 Eagle setup even more so, but that is hard to achieve. A note though is that with Hysilens' 8 DoT limit thing, patience is all you need, gain some power, and is probably Kafka's second best like her now again. The third slot is then Black Swan or a premium Amper. Black Swan has some issues in her kit, but one thing is sure, she got a buff from Hysilens. Her 4 dots will let Arcana stack up a ton, and having another detonator in the team will allow for even more stacking and damage. You will be seeing max Arcana explosions quite regularly now. So now you have Black Swan amping the whole team and doing a ton of damage, Hysilens amping the whole team and doing a ton of damage, and Kafka enabling and buffing the whole team. It is a very synergistic trio, and I love how DoT works all together as a team. And because the team enables each other so well, it's designed so that replacing Black Swan with a Harmony unit won't even always be better. Black Swan does so much damage in this team, and because Kafka is an enabler, your support would have to be really powerful to help bridge the gap in damage and then go further. Finally, the DoT team all have some really powerful E1s for vertical investment enjoyers. If you don't have Black Swan, well that's okay. They designed Hysilens to be able to function with and without her, which I find really cool. So you need Kafka for DoT, but you don't need to pull Black Swan on top. And so for the amp slot, you have a ton of options. Robin is as always exceptional thanks to her high buffs and team-wide advance. As said before, DoT is backloaded, so one way to frontload them is by giving the whole team suddenly a ton of more turns and thus detonations. Kafka's frequent turns and follow-ups really help battery her here too, but you will want to use a quid pro quo Gallagher. Two problems are her lack of SP generation, so be careful, and her attack is pretty diluted, but it is still a noticeable buff, and the rest of her power is still there. Ruan Mei is still fantastic despite it being nearly 2 years since her release, and would just be a more comfortable Robin here. Her mini delays help frontload some DoT and thus Hysilens alt DoT effects, and again her buffs are great. The res pen is also really nice for this team's nature, as they will not always be against an enemy with the correct weaknesses for all teammates. Trebi can work too with some nice personal damage and res pen again, and she can push you 2 tons of breakpoints with Dance Dance Dance. I also really like her instant follow-up after Kafka ult to let her immediately Kafka follow-up and not waste charges. Though it is RNG who it will hit, which is sometimes annoying, and I prefer Robin or Ruan Mei. Cypher also performs pretty nicely, and as I keep on saying with this unit, she fixes damage AV problems on teams. DoT is backloaded, and so Cypher helps out with that with her ultimate that lets you store damage until you want it. Her being completely SP positive is really nice too, no more worrying about SP management. Silverwolf is good too thanks to her high Death Shred on ult, but she will overcap on Death Shred if using Cypher's Cone or Resolution, which can hurt the performance. Jiaocho of course works too, but his amp is pretty underwhelming in this team. We have vulnerability from Hysilens, her S1, and then Jiaocho, and a ton of enemies and content just have inbuilt vulnerability now. The DoT team also does no ult damage really, so that part is useless here. His damage is not that high until E2, and the only bonus synergy is 1 extra DoT effect from him, which cannot beat out the raw amp and utility from some other units here. As for 4-star options, out of the DoT units the best would be Sampo, as he can detonate the large wind shear stacks from E4 onwards with every skill. He is surprisingly powerful as a 3rd slot in this team. Do not underestimate our secret emanator. Luca would be my next choice for a high single target performance, and since you're probably going to be against physical weakness, he's not bad. And Gwenifin is okay, but can only detonate on ultimate. So yeah, DoT can really use a ton of units in that 3rd slot, and if you have all the premium DoT units, well, your other team or 2 teams in the future will then have full access to all your damage ampers. That's the beauty of it. For the sustain slot, your best bets are Huohuo, Aventurine with Trend, Hysin E0S1, and Gallagher Quid Pro Quo. Use whoever's free, all are really good. Ho uses SP, so she's a bit harder to use in triple dot. The energy is excellent for this team as it leads to more detonations in the long run. Aventurine provides some damage whilst also contributing many attacks, which is useful for enabling Kafka's follow-ups, but also good for stacking up Hysilens' dots as fast as possible. Trend on top is an extra dot, and thus 80% attack multiply from Hysilens' zone. Hyacinth E0 S1 spamming basics after the first Eco summon is a great sustain that can provide some SP, some damage amp from the S1, and a bunch of attacks which are helpful just like Aventurines. And Gallagher is an SP generator which can be useful in teams like triple dot, and if you use Robin and dual dot, his classic quid pro quo abuse is also nice. But you can also use Cypher, who holds her ult, and thus use Gallagher to battery Kafka and Hysilens a turn. So that's your dot team setup. Hopefully in the future we get more dot-centric units, but it's also weird to just be only dot-centered when thinking about sustains and supports. So maybe 4 stars Copium, or maybe they'll do something like Hyacinth, who is HP and HP drain focus, but is pretty powerful elsewhere. We will see. And finally, some might ask about Acheron, but Hysilens' damage amp and utility for Acheron is much weaker than someone like Cypher, and then Hysilens' damage contribution is pretty rough without Kafka on the team. I would not pull her for this at all. Anyways, that's all on Hysilens. Let me know what you think of her down below, and a like and sub if this helped. Thanks to my beautiful YouTube members, thanks for watching, and have a Guoba day.